This vision is an interlude between seals 6 and 7 and is best seen as the answer to the question posed right at the end of chapter 6, who can stand or who can withstand? There is a sealing that denotes ownership and protection, but the big question is, who are the 144,000? Well, first of all, let's look at when this happens. If Revelation is about a strict timeline, then sorry guys, it's too late, as the world as we know it has just been wrapped up, finished in the 6th seal in chapter 6. This sealing only makes sense if it happens before the 4 horsemen are let loose. And this in fact is the first of our replays or different perspectives on the same scene. Hopefully, we're beginning to see that Revelation is clearly not about the outworking of a strict timeline of events. It just doesn't make sense, does it, to continue when everything has ended? So, there is a holding back, with perhaps the 4 winds being a different take on the 4 horsemen. The Lamb is not able to open the first seal of the scroll until this sealing and protection of God's people takes place. So, what is this mark or seal? We don't exactly know, but we do know later that there's going to be another mark of ownership, the mark of the beast in chapter 13. And contrasting pairs are one of the ways in which Revelation is shaped. And later, we'll have the impure Babylon woman contrasted with the pure New Jerusalem bride. So, the 144,000 stand in contrast to those who receive the mark of the beast. For both, it is a sign of ownership. But for the 144,000, it is also about spiritual protection rather than physical protection, because it's clear they've been through great suffering. Now, speculating around the possible physical nature or manifestation of these marks or seals seems to miss the point, as these marks or seals are about spiritual ownership, and this will ultimately determine one's eternal destiny. Now, who the 144,000 are basically boils down to whether the number is seen to be literal or representative. If it's literal, then it's clearly only Jews, with those exact numbers from each tribe. Now today, it's possible for someone to prove their Jewishness, but it's impossible to know what tribe someone is from. So distinguishing by ancient tribe cannot literally happen. And the literal also plays into a scenario that sees nationalistic Israel as having a separate destiny from new covenant Christians. And here the middle part of Revelation is seen to be primarily about the saving of Israel based on a literal 144,000. Now, we're not going to go down that line, but I'll talk more about that viewpoint in a later bite. Let's look instead at 144,000 being representative and see how that stacks up. We're not going to get heavily into numbers, but we have mentioned the significance of the number 7. And 144,000 is 12 times 12 times 1,000. It's all very symbolic, with 12 being a key Bible number, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles, and particularly so in Revelation. 1,000 is also a special number. And so everything about the number 144,000 suggests it is representative. Now, before the mention of 144,000, the angel announces in the verse before that it will be God's servants who will be sealed. And the word servant is used many times in Revelation, with the letter starting as John writing as God's servant to the servants of God. Now, in the whole of Revelation, the term God's servants never refers to purely ethnic or nationalistic Israel. There's also a marked similarity to the earlier scene in chapter 5 with the lion and the lamb. Now, we didn't comment on it earlier, but John heard the description of the lion, and then he turned and saw a lamb. He hears the Old Testament symbol and then sees the New Testament reality. There's the same thing here. He hears the Old Testament symbolism, rooting it in the Passover, where the blood of the slain lamb provided protection for the Israelite households. And in Ezekiel 9 verse 4, where Ezekiel sees a vision of the coming judgment of God and how his people are sealed with a mark of protection. So what is happening is rooted in the Old Testament. But then John turns and is surprised to see a great multi-ethnic multitude. So, if the lion and the lamb are one and the same, then why can't these two groups of people be an old and a new way of looking at the same group? We'll come across the 144,000 in Revelation 14, so we'll pick it up again then. And also in chapter 22, God's servants are always before him and they have God's name on their foreheads. They're the 144,000. But they're not designated as such, as the significance of the numbering is for when they are on earth, suffering and going through it. They're not a select literal group, but all God's people with him for eternity. Just going back to the numbers. Everyone notes that this listing of the 12 tribes is different to any other listing in the Old Testament. And it's difficult to come to any firm conclusions on why these 12 and why in this order. But what's helpful is knowing that when the tribes were counted in the Old Testament, it was done to ascertain the fighting strength of the nation. So again, looking back into the Old Testament, we can see this is a picture of God's people as a spiritual army. Let's finally focus on this amazing scene before the throne and the Lamb. They're dressed in white and are safe and secure and rejoicing in the presence of the Lamb. A marked contrast to those at the end of chapter 6 who are attempting to flee and hide from the wrath of the Lamb. These are God's people, a spiritual army who've suffered but have been faithful to their calling in great troubles or tribulation. The Lamb is both their salvation and their solace.